All right, everyone. So let's now talk about a sense of self in infancy and toddlerhood. So, when do babies begin to recognize themselves as separate from others? When do they develop a consciousness of self? So, one good way to study this is using a mirror. There seem to be several stages in learning to recognize oneself in a mirror in infancy and beyond. In the first few months, they'll show little interest in their own image or anyone else's, but around 3 months, they begin engaging in longer bouts of cooing and smiling and reaching for their images in a mirror. And do they respond differently to their own image versus others? Yes, they do. They even at 3 months, they tend to look longer at themselves in the mirror, and they smile and vocalize more with images of other babies in the mirror. This suggests that infants recognize themselves and find their own image interesting. And when it comes to other babies' images, they behave as if they are potential interactive partners. So there does seem to be a distinction, even as early as 3 months. Between 4 to 9 months, they seem to be able to discriminate between their own image and images of adults that are mimicking their movements in a mirror. And at 18 months, it's been tested by putting a red spot on their nose or on their face somewhere. And if this red spot is somewhere on their face, the children will reach to it, like reach to their own nose, or they'll ask, "What's that?" Which shows that they realize that it's them in the mirror, right? This is called the rouge test. And after just a few months of this starting to occur, if someone points to a mirror and asks, "Who's that?" the child won't hesitate in replying, "Me." So this is kind of gives you an illustration of the development and how they develop a sense of self over time. Now let's talk about self-conscious emotions. So the sense of self gives way for a new class of emotions. We've talked about basic emotions like joy, fear, anger, but we have what would a new class of emotions be? What kind um, what kind of emotions do you think are associated with a sense of self that emerge in this time? So just pause for a second. Think to yourself, what kind of emotions are associated with a sense of self? Assuming that you paused and thought of some examples. Um, if you said any of these, you are correct. I'll just go ahead and click through the rest now. But self-conscious emotions would be things like embarrassment, pride, shame, guilt, envy. Why are these self-conscious emotions? Well, they depend on a baby's new ability to recognize, talk about, and think about themselves in relation to others. So again, before we talked about basic emotions like joy, fear, and anger, disgust. And these are more simple and raw. They're more so related to events that caused them. Self-conscious emotions are a little more complex. Children are now considering how other people might be judging or evaluating them as an individual. And sure enough, self-conscious emotions seem to be activated by the prefrontal cortex, which is associated with things, again, like self-regulation and higher cognitive functions. Whereas basic emotions involve the activation of the more primitive areas of the brain, which might explain why they come first. By 2 years old, kids have a pretty strong sense of self as a distinct person and therefore more self-awareness. They also have more sensitivity to adult standards of good versus bad. And they have this new awareness trying to live up to these standards. So that just about covers sense of self. And then the last video after this, we're going to just dive into trust and autonomy, and that'll be pretty quick. But hopefully that gives you a little overview of how children develop a sense of self, realize that they're an individual separate from others, and what implications come along with that. So I will see you in the next section. Thanks for joining, everyone.